Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Strange and Exiles podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Toirac, and this is my co-host, Daniel Toirac Sr.
Hello. Welcome. Come back. Thank you for watching this. I do want to mention, apparently you have to tell people to do this. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I don't know what those things are, but there must be buttons on your screen right now. Just click on all the buttons. Every button, click on it.
Nice.
Isn't it your job to tell people to do that? By the way, why is it you always sit over there? How come we don't swap seats sometimes?
You want to?
No, I'm good. I like it over here. Yeah. I got a view of the wife from here, the producer. Yeah, today she's cheesing it up. She has 3 or 4 different types of cheese over there. A little melange of cheese. All right.
So last week we
By the way, fire lunch today. I do got to give a shout out. At Toro Loco, Kendall, really good stuff. All right, what were you saying?
Last week we started. You wanted to go through how the treatment of women in Islam, according especially to the Quran and the Hadiths.
Yeah.
So this week we're going to be continuing that. Hopefully, we get through a little bit more, except we did a little bit less than we wanted to do originally.
Yeah.
But
what I do want to do is, before we get into the text, into this, I want for you to play a video for them. It is a video that I found. The Muslims have severely suppressed YouTube in regards to the content that's out there. Years ago, you could put Muslim abuse of women and you have videos. Now you can't even find any of them. But in Iran, they're having a big movement, the women over there, to where they don't want to wear their head coverings outside in public. They feel like they're being oppressed by the male leadership of Islam. And so then they've gone out and they've done protest after protest. And it even got to a point where one girl, a year or two ago, she went out without a head covering. Not only without a head covering, she walked the streets of Tehran in a bra and panty.
Oh, wow.
And they subsequently killed her.
Yeah.
So, and then now they're making it to where it's a capital offense for you to not wear your head covering. They even came up with, they give you different options. Number 1, you either go to jail if you choose not to wear your head covering, or number 2, they've created these, what they call clinical institutions, where they re-educate you. It's almost like they mandatorily send you to like this facility where they re-educate you on Islam and all. In other words, they whip you into submission.
Of course.
So yeah, we're gonna play this video and then we'll come back after, right? So there you go. Yeah, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
That's literally what's going on. I mean, it's just crazy. And, it's sad to see these images. It's sad to see women that are being attacked. I don't know if you saw in the video, there's one scene where a guy literally went into a market and he threw yogurt over two women's heads. They take this stuff serious, and for them, they're willing to die on this, on this old law from, once again, 1400 years ago. And they want to enforce it to a point to where it's causing violence, it's causing riots. And you saw in the video, it's pretty shocking, considering we live in the West, where women are not oppressed, women are not forced to do anything, women are allowed to do everything. But then once you go in 2025, once you go and see that these Sharia law countries, how they enforce the Quran, independent of social change, independent of, and I hate using these words, evolving. I really hate though, because it's just it kind of paints a picture of us changing our stance on things. However, the difference between Islam and the Bible and Christianity doesn't oppress women that way. Yes, Paul does mention that women should be quiet in the church. Paul does mention that women should not lead over men, that women should not preach to men. Okay, not every church is as rigid. For instance, in our church, I would consider us not super fundamental, but not loose either. And we have women. My mom teaches sometimes on Wednesday nights. We have a deaconess. That's another thing. If you're rigidly by the Bible, deacons should only be men. In our church, we have deaconesses. My dad was a little bit more forthright than the fundamental type people. But the difference between Christianity and Islam is that Islam, they don't leave the door open for this evolution process. They don't allow the door to be open under Sharia law. Once again, I need to specify. This pertains to the countries that enforce Sharia law, namely Iran. Obviously, the rest of the Muslim world is completely liberal, which we've gone through that in all of these videos. They are super open. They're okay. They're all about tolerance. They're all about this. They're all about that. I'm speaking namely of those tight-knit Sharia law enforcing countries, which I'm not telling them to evolve. I'm just saying that that very harsh, patristic, literal interpretation of the Sharia law nowadays, with social media the way it is, with the ability of images and photos to just be shot throughout the entire world, that was cool 50 years ago, 30 years ago even, before you had the modern day media. Remember, up until 30 years ago, there was no global media. There was only local media. Suddenly out of nowhere, CNN becomes a thing. Fox becomes a thing. Now suddenly out of nowhere, they're reporting from all around the world. In other words, you can't hide from it anymore. Sharia law, you can't hide. You cannot hide behind the fact that it is completely oppressive to women. It is gross. And as we're going to go through tonight, we're going to see more about what the Sharia law enforces within Islam. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
Cool. So continue off of last week. We ended off speaking or going to the next chapter about sex, in which they have views that are very much twisted versions of ours. And as we've seen, according to the Quran and to the Hadiths, pretty much all Muhammad said women are good for is essentially just being able to have babies.
That's all they're there for. They're plowed fields.
So maybe you can explain to us some of the rights and beliefs as it pertains to women in Islam.
To women within sex?
Yeah, within sex.
Yeah. Well, as I gave you the bullet points last week, I'll go over them again. Number 1, adultery is a capital offense. They actually hold adultery very high within. I was actually just watching a video earlier of Muhammad Hijab. He's one of these. Him and his buddy Ali Dawa. They are basically the Muslim apologist. Just like we have Christian apologists that go and debate and speak, they're the ones that they preach their religion, and they become quite popular on the internet. And then he was being interviewed by this guy, and then they brought up the whole adultery thing. And then he says that within Islam, there's like lower grade sins. It was just funny the way he's saying it. And then there's like mid-grade sins, and then there's like high grade sins. And adultery is the equivalent, he says, of basically murder. So that's how they hold it. So in other words, a religion that places such high emphasis on sex, a religion that was built upon you being able to grab any slave woman and rape them, a religion that was began by a founder, a prophet, PBUH, Muhammad Puba, that he married a 6-year-old Aisha, and then subsequently, when she was 9 years old, mounted the poor little thing. They place a very godly high view of adultery, which once again is a good thing. I don't feel, at least within the Christian realm, adultery I wouldn't consider as a capital offense. I would say that it is an offense that severely dishonors God, because you're damaging the nucleus of what God has created as one. I would also say that the Bible teaches us that it is grounds for divorce. But nowhere does Jesus or anywhere else in the Bible say cut her head off or cut his head off for committing adultery. So adultery is a capital offense. Number 2, Muhammad Puba allowed female genital mutilation as an acceptable practice. We're going to get into that. Thirdly, a woman should not enhance her appearance. So yes, all of you Christians going out there and getting the BBLs, and getting all the implants and getting all of the Botox and all of that, within Islam is a woman should not enhance her appearance. So you don't have long lines of Muslims in Iran getting BBLs. If you don't know what that is a Brazilian butt lift. Look it up. It's a thing. And then fourthly, a woman should never be alone with any man who could be her sexual partner. So now let's get started with this. Sex outside of marriage with another Muslim has serious consequences. Sex with a kafir female does not have any strictures or restrictions. So time out. A man can have sex with a non-believer, no problem. That's how they justify the raping and the pillaging, right? So in other words, a Muslim man can have sex with a Christian woman, no problem. However, let's see what else it says. Under no circumstances, including marriage, is a Muslim female to ever have sex with a kafir, with a non-believer. So it's okay for men to go ahead, rape, pillage. It's okay for a man to have sex with a Christian woman. However, under no circumstances can a Muslim woman have sex with a Christian man. See, that's the divide right there. That's how they get around it. That's how they keep men in dominating over women. So in other words, when you make it part of your law that a Muslim woman must marry a Muslim man, now you leave the door closed. So that woman has zero options. Now, of course, in the Bible, it does say, do not yoke yourself with someone that is a non-believer. We obviously have many examples of the Israelites in the Old Testament, of them getting with the Canaanites, with the Moabites, with all of the ites in the Old Testament. We know that. Even Paul himself talks about this, that it would be better for you not to marry or whatever. But then they also say that if you are married to an unbelieving woman, then you should stay with her. In other words, Paul, he even promotes the fact no divorce. No divorce. In Islam, it is quite different, which we're going to get to that in a bit. Now, this is from a hadith. A man told Muhammad that he had kissed a woman. Through his prophet, Allah revealed this. So through the prophet, Allah revealed. Now, this is in the Quran. Observe prayer at early morning, at the close of day, and at the approach of night. Be good, for good deeds drive away evil deeds. This is a warning for the mindful. Be patient, for Allah will not let the reward of the righteous perish. The man asked Muhammad, is this instruction for me? He said, it is for all my followers. Okay. When maize, This guy's name is Maze, M-A-I-Z, Maze. When Maze came to the Muhammad to confess adultery, the prophet said to him, probably you have only kissed the lady or winked or looked at her. In other words, now he's trying to justify it. Yeah. Now he's trying to diminish it, you know. He said, no, O Allah's apostle. Muhammad Puba said, using no euphemism, did you have sexual intercourse with her? After he confessed to his crime, the prophet ordered that he be stoned to death. On another occasion, the Jew brought before Muhammad a man and woman who had committed adultery. He ordered both of them to be stoned to death near the place where the funeral prayers are offered beside the mosque. So in other words, since we have a hadith of Muhammad, see now you observed Allah's response. Mm-hmm. What was Allah's response to the situation? Allah, apparently, according, Allah said, guess what? Go pray. Mm-hmm. Go pray, go pray, go pray, because the more good deeds you do, they outweigh the evil deeds that you've done. In other words, you've committed a sin. I'm going to give you a way out. Go pray, go pray, go pray. And then he said, this is a warning, you know, do not let the reward of the righteous perish. In other words, on the last day, you don't want to lose your rewards. You don't want to lose paradise. Okay. However, look at in the hadith, when this is just Muhammad talking, look at how he takes what Allah has said and how now he takes it in his own way, which is what we were listening to in the car today. That basically Muhammad made up a lot of these laws. Mm. They were not in the Quran. They were not, which is why we're watching a video of an apologist debating with a Muslim. And then, you know, he brought up this point. How is it that a lot of this stuff is not in the Quran? Oh, but it's in the hadith. But when you go to the hadith, this is just Muhammad saying it. Yeah. So now they're in Sharia law. This is Muhammad's law. That's not even from Allah. That's not in the Quran. Now, if you commit adultery, you can be stoned to death. So now that is why it's a capital punishment. Now let's talk about sexual mutilation. And this is where it gets really stupid. It is unfortunate that the term circumcision is applied to both the removal of the foreskin of the male and the removal of the clitoris of the woman. So in other words, since Allah commands for you to be circumcised, they not only applied that to men in the Old Testament, in the Jews, that was for men. Women were not circumcised in the Old Testament. That was strictly for men. Men were the ones that were circumcised. But then in Islam, they have taken the whole circumcision concept and they've also applied it to women. There is no comparison as to the effects. What are the effects? Circumcision does not destroy sexual pleasure for the man. However, if you remove the clitoris from a female, it's almost like you remove the entire penis of a man. That woman will never have any pleasure. So the sad reality is that they applied circumcision to both male and female, thus allowing the man, because of course everything in Islam is sex, allowing the man to continue to experience pleasure while removing completely the possibility of any pleasure for the woman. It's just sad. This is a hadith. Muhammad said, 5 practices are characteristics of the ancient prophets. Circumcision. Okay, see, I don't know where he got this. Now, when he says the ancient prophets, he's talking about our prophets. Yeah. He's talking about Isaiah. He's talking about Jeremiah. He's talking about David. All right? This is what he says. This is literally in the hadith. And now, if you tell me if this is anywhere in our Old Testament. Okay. Muhammad said, 5 practices are characteristics of the ancient prophets. Number 1, circumcision. Number 2, shaving the pubic hair. Okay. Number 3, cutting the mustaches short. Number 4, clipping the nails. And number 5, depilating the hair of the armpits. In other words, shaving your armpits. I don't know where he got some of those. Obviously, circumcision I'm cool with, but I don't know where the shaving of the pubic hair came from. I mean, that's nowhere in my Bible, but okay, cool. This hadith, the one that I'm going to read coming up, refers to the circumcision of female genitalia. It assumes that both the man and woman are to be circumcised. and this is another hadith here saying, an argument arose in Medina between a group of helpers and immigrants concerning bathing. Okay, so you have an argument coming up. You got the Muslim helpers, the people, and then you got immigrants that are coming into Medina. Mm-hmm. The helpers believed that bathing after sex was obligatory only if there is an ejaculation. The immigrants believed that a bath is always obligatory after sex. So in other words, the helpers say you only have to have sex if you ejaculate. However, the immigrants, because they're not nasty and filthy, they say, no, after you have sex, you should bathe, you know, I mean, independent of any sort of whatever may happen. So what happens? Abu Musa said, let me settle the matter. He went to Aisha, poor little girl. Well, now she's an adult. He went to Aisha and asked and received her permission to speak. He said, Aisha, beloved of the Prophet, I want to question you about an embarrassing matter. So, of course, this guy, Abu Musa, just so you know, Musa is Moses in Arabic. So this guy, father of Moses, Abu Musa, I want to ask you, and it's embarrassing. Aisha said, don't be shy. Speak to me as you would speak to your mother. Abu Musa then said, when is bathing obligatory? Aisha responded, you have asked the right person. Oh, Aisha has the knowledge. This is good. Muhammad Puba has said that a bath is obligatory when a man is encompassed by a woman and their circumcised genitalia touch. So in other words, independent of ejaculation, once you have plowed the field, that you still have to shower. Mm-hmm. All right. Just so you guys know, I'm saying Puba after I say Muhammad is because what the Muslims always say, Muhammad, praise be upon him. So Puba is the praise be upon him. But I'm doing it as a joke, really. It's not. I'm doing it more to see if he'll laugh. It's not really a thing because I don't think any praise should be upon that animal. Circumcision is part of the Sharia law. Here we have both the translation and the argument about the translation. So here we have in Assyria, circumcision is obligatory for both men and women. No, this is from the actual Sharia law. Circumcision is obligatory for both men and women. For men, it consists of removing the I can never say that word. What's that word?
Prepuce.
Is it prepuce or prepuce?
I'm not sure.
Prepuce? The skin from the penis. Huh? Producer, she worked in the medical field. She knows what it is. What is it? Prepuce? Prepuce. Thanks, producer. Always on time. Removing the prepuce from the penis, and for the woman, removing the prepuce of the clitoris. Not the clitoris itself, as some mistakenly assert. However, what the Arabic actually says is, circumcision is obligatory for every male and female by cutting off the piece of skin on the glands of the penis of the male. But circumcision of the female is by cutting out the clitoris. So in other words, you see how they try to clean it up?
Yeah.
You see how now they have cleaned it up. They have said, no, only the prepuce. Producer, do women have a prepuce on their clitoris? She says no. I actually don't know the answer to that. I mean, is there a skin outside of the
I don't think so.
Man, we got to go back to biology class. Or is it physiology, anatomy and physiology?
Probably that one.
I'm going to look up the book. So you see how they try to clean it up. They went, oh, no, not the clitoris itself, as some mistakenly assert. But when you go to the Arabic, that's where the nail just shuts them down. Because what does the Arabic say? Is by cutting out the clitoris. This deceptive translation obscures the Sharia law. It is a deception called taqiyya, a form of sacred deception. Incredible. The sunnah of Muhammad is that he never forbade the removal of the clitoris, a common custom of his day. Sex is used to tell the doctrine of predestination. Islam has a dualistic theory about predestination. There is support for predestination and there is support for free will. Which is right? Both are right. That is the nature of duality. Now, this is from a hadith. Muhammad said, each one of you collected in your mother's womb 40 days, and then turned into a clot for 40 days, and then turned into a piece of flesh for a similar period of 40 days. Then Allah sends an angel and orders him to write 4 things upon you: your livelihood, deeds, age, and whether you will be of the wretched or the blessed in the hereafter. Then the soul was breathed into you. So, okay, do you understand where we're going with this?
Yeah.
In other words, whenever a baby is conceived, you are there for 40 days, and then later on you turn into a blood clot for 40 days, and then the Allah sends an angel and orders to write 4 things upon you. In other words, he imputes these things to you. Number 1, your livelihood. Number 2, your deeds. Number 3, your age. And number 4, either you're going to go to hell or paradise. So he does all of that. Mm-hmm. So in other words, Allah predestines you. He basically says this is who you're going to be. Yeah. Independent of whatever you choose to do yourself, there is zero free will. Your life is already written. Mm-hmm. Okay, so they make Allah to be a very sovereign God. Then the soul was breathed into you, your life. And by Allah, a man may do the evil deeds of the people of hell until he is within arm's reach of hell. But then that writing which Allah has ordered the angel to write takes precedent. So in other words, see, now this is the funny part of reconciliation between predestination and free will. In other words, Allah predestines you. You're either going to go to heaven or hell. He tells you all your deeds, all you're going to do. However, in your life, you can do whatever you want. But at the last second, like today, the pastor said, the Allah of 11:59 p.m., before the day turns, he will make sure that you go on the path. So in other words, you could be a perfect Muslim your entire life, but if you're destined to hell, right before you die, you're going to denounce Islam. Yeah. Conversely, you could be not even a Muslim, the worst Muslim of all. Never do the prayers, never do the shahada, never do any of that stuff. But right before you die, somehow you'll see the light if you're destined to go to paradise. In Islam, the only males that a female should be alone with are those she cannot marry. This limits her male relationships to family members. School, sports, career, friendships are all determined by this following hadith. Islam always assumes that if a man and woman are alone, what is it about, Junior?
Sex.
So in other words, you have a religion that is brought down supposedly by the Almighty Allah God, sent through his angel Gabriel, given to a pervert in Muhammad Puba. And then now you're telling me that all of this holiness, however, you're telling me that this is a religion that assumes from the offset that if a man and woman are in a room together that are not married or they're not family, that they are going to have sex. What type of view do they have of not only the woman, as if every Muslim woman is completely loose? Is every Muslim woman that loose? Are they that interested in sex? Number 1. Number 2, it puts into question the integrity of the male Muslims. In other words, if you're telling me that Fatima cannot be in the same room as Abdul because Abdul and Fatima may have sex with one another, but why can't the religion that is from God assume that Abdul is righteous or that Fatima is a good woman? Why do you assume from the opposite? See, that's how you know it's from the devil. Yeah. Once again, every single line that we read confirms Satan's fingerprint on these documents, confirms that this is all from Satan. Let me move on. This is the hadith. Muhammad said, "It is not permissible for a man to be alone with a woman." Of course, I would never leave my wife alone with Muhammad. It's a guarantee he's going to plow that field. I mean, this is what they do. It is not permissible for a man to be alone with a woman, and no lady should travel except with her husband or a person whom she could not possibly marry. Then a man got up and said, so now he says, "Oh, Allah's apostle, I have a question. I have enlisted in the army for jihad, and my wife is proceeding for the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca." Muhammad said, "Go and perform the Hajj with your wife." So in other words, This guy had a question about this, and then instead of letting the wife go to Hajj on her own, he says, no. Go with her to the Hajj, and then take her back home, lock the door, and then go to the jihad, to the army. Before sex, a Muslim should always pray for protection from Satan. We read that one last time, but I'll read it again. There's a hadith. Muhammad said that when you're having sex with one's wife, he should say, in the name of Allah, Allah, oh Allah, protect us from shaitan, Satan, and prevent Satan from approaching. Oh, this one gets a little bit deeper. Prevent Satan from approaching our offspring that you are going to give us. He just assumes that she's getting pregnant right there.
Yeah.
So in other words, every time you have sex, she could be pregnant. Let's pray that shaitan will stay away from the baby. If the man and his wife have a child as a result of that encounter, Satan will not harm it. Of course, Satan's not going to harm it. Satan's happy that he's a Muslim. Yeah. So, and then what do you think about homosexuality? Homosexuality between women is treated more seriously than between men. Once again, different standard. So in other words, if you're two gay dudes in Tehran, yeah, they look down on you. But if you're two lesbians, that's no bueno. What does the hadith say? If any of your women are guilty of lewdness, in the Arabic, that amounts to lesbianism. So if any of your women are guilty of lesbianism, then bring in 4 of you as witnesses against them. If they admit their guilt, then shut them up in their houses until they die or until Allah makes some other way for them. If 2 of your men are guilty of an indecent act, homosexuality, punish both of them. If they ask for forgiveness and change their ways, then leave them alone, for Allah is forgiving and merciful. That is so dumb when you look at it. So in other words, 2 lesbians are caught. You need witnesses. See, you notice that it didn't say nothing about witnesses for the men.
No.
Because they're taking their word for it. They're like, yeah, we're into that. Okay. But if it's for women, you have to get 4 witnesses, which obviously they can easily just find 4 dudes that'll say, yeah, okay. And if they admit their guilt, then shut them up in their houses. In other words, lock the door, throw away the key. They are never allowed to go out. But if 2 dudes are getting down, all they have to do is ask for forgiveness. You punish them. Once again, he doesn't tell us how you punish them. Probably just slap them on the hand. Definitely don't slap them on the butt, because that could be misconstrued. If they ask for forgiveness and change their ways, in other words, they decide that they don't want to be a homosexual anymore, then leave them alone. Allah is forgiving and merciful. Is Allah forgiving to the women?
I guess not.
And if you read this, Allah is only forgiving the men. The women, shut the door, throw away the key. So, in other words, that's how they look at women in general. Once again, I want you to get an overall view of how they say that women are equal to them spiritually. They say this and that, but really, when you go down to the law, to their law, women are garbage. Women are just holes. There are vaginas. They are just there for pleasure and making babies.
And you read verse like that, and it makes sense why Muhammad, in his supposed vision, goes down to hell, and most of them are women, is because there's so much less repentance and salvation and forgiveness for the women there are for men.
Yeah, if you're justifying that fake verse, then obviously that's why there's all the women down there, because Allah doesn't forgive them.
Yeah.
Even though they say, didn't we talk about last week, that they would all be judged the same way, fairly, accordingly in the last day? But why is it only the women go to hell? And all the dudes, even the gay ones, are up there. As long as they repent, they're up there with their. Now, wait, do the gay guys get girl virgins or boy virgins? Oh, wait, you know what? Maybe they just have the virgins there, but they play with the 300 little boys. Maybe. Yeah. I'm sorry we're being gross. This is their religion. This is what they believe. Anyway, all right.
So we mentioned in a couple of past episodes when we were going through their beliefs how, according to the Quran, it's okay to be your wife, and there's a specific verse that says it's okay to punish your wife in that way. So maybe you kind of explain it to us a bit deeper now.
All right, this is the chapter on beating the wife.
Yeah.
These are the bullet points we'll expound after. Number 1, we have to get this from the beginning. Men are superior to women. Just start out there. In Islam, only a mother is held in esteem. Other than that, men are superior to women. That goes on up until today. Women are looked down upon. Women are nothing. Once again, they're just vaginas. That's all they are. The men are always the superior ones. What else? Men can lightly beat their wives. They say lightly, that's a lie. Number 3, Muhammad hit one of his wives. So we have proof from the prophet, from Muhammad Puba, that he himself beat his wife. Fourthly, Sharia law supports beating the wife. So God forgive all of those poor women in Iran right now that are getting slapped around. All right. And fifthly, a wife should not be struck in the face. At least there is some mercy. They can't get slapped in the face, but that doesn't disregard the rest of their body. The face is what, like 4% of your body. Everything else is fair game. All right. So let's get into this first one. The men are superior to women. If the detailed rules of marital conduct are not followed by the wife, there is sacred force. Here we have the words of the Quran. This is from the Quran 4, ayah 34. Allah has made men superior to women because men spend their wealth to support them. Talk to me about that.
So I guess women just can't support themselves financially. They need the men.
Because, number 1, they're not allowed to work.
No.
So in other words, you make a law that says women are only to be in the house and to produce babies. But then you say that men are superior. And this is a Quran. This isn't a hadith. This isn't just some rambling from Muhammad. This is in Quran. You say, and look how dumb this God is. I mean, realistically, all-knowing, all-powerful God, he actually says this. Allah has made men superior to women because men, not because they're stronger, not because they're wiser, not because they are the male headship of the home, as the Bible tells us. The Bible never says that a male is superior to a woman because the man pays for everything in the house. That's what he's saying here.
Yeah.
You know, in the Bible tells us that the man is the head over the woman. In other words, a headship signifying a role that he plays, whereas the woman is submissive to the man. That does not mean that the man can rule over her with a rod of iron. That's the way that God has created the order. And it's a spiritual order. However, in Islam, women are less than men, not because of this headship, not because of a sacred, holy headship. It's because they pay for all the bills. This is stupid logic. It makes no sense to me. Therefore, virtuous women are obedient. And of course, we know they're not, because Muhammad himself, his own wives were not obedient. And they are to guard their unseen parts as Allah has guarded them. As for women whom you fear will rebel, admonish them first and then send them to a separate bed and then beat them. If they are obedient after that, then do nothing further. Surely Allah is exalted and great. Allah is a lying nothingness. So here you have a verse directly out from the Quran that says that men are superior to women because they pay the bills. And then it also talks about good women are obedient. However, if you got some woman that might rebel because they don't like you or because you didn't take a shower, then admonish them. Then you send them to another bed. She's happy as heck. And then if she's still rebellious, you beat her. And then if she's obedient after that, then do nothing. Now, what happens if she's not obedient after that? Then you divorce her.
Oh, yeah.
Then you get rid of her. Because once again, she's a piece of property. She's nothing. She's not a person. She's a vagina. If that vagina living in your house is fighting with you all the time, then you just get rid of it and get another vagina. And that's basically what you do. You just swap them out. You know, you go to the vagina swap shop and you just swap them out. When Muhammad gave his last sermon, he mentioned beating the wife. In his last sermon before he died, I guess the subject was beating the wife. Everybody open up your Quran to chapter this or that. All right. This is from the Surah. Beaten lightly. Beating the wife is sacred because both Allah and Muhammad Puba sanction it. The hadith is filled with examples that establish the Sharia law about how to go about beating the wife. In this hadith that I'm going to read right now, a wife has her face bruised from being hit by her husband and goes to see Muhammad Puba for his judgment on a marital problem. Rifa divorced his wife, who then married Abdur Rahman. Not ramen the noodles, Rahman. The lady came to Aisha, the wife, the lady, wife of Muhammad, wearing a green veil, and complained to Aisha of her husband and showed her a green spot, so in other words, a bruise on her skin caused by the beating. So in other words, this is not a little light tap. If she has a bruise, that was a hit, okay? It was the habit of ladies to support each other. So when Muhammad came, Aisha said, I have not seen any woman suffering as much as Muslim women. Look, her skin is greener than her clothes. So now, Aisha, she's spiced up. She's like, you know what? This ain't right. Now, we don't know how old she is here, but obviously at this point in her life, remember, Muhammad dies when she's 18. So I'm assuming this was closer to the end. Maybe this is the last sermon he gave. So, all right. When Abdur Rahman heard that his wife had gone to Muhammad, he came with his 2 sons by another wife. The wife in the green veil said, by Allah, I have done no wrong to him, but he is impotent and is useless to me as this. Oh, she called him out. Man, she called him out in presence of Muhammad, Puba, and Aisha, and the sons. So now the sons are like, oh, I have done nothing wrong. Holding and showing the fringe of her garment, Abdur Rahman said, by Allah, O Allah's apostle, she has told a lie. I am very strong and can satisfy her, but she is disobedient and wants to go back to Rifa, her previous husband. Mm-hmm. Muhammad said to her, if that is your intention, then you know that it is unlawful for you to remarry Rifa until you have consummated your marriage with Abdur Rahman. Then the Prophet saw 2 boys with Abdur Rahman and asked him, are these your sons? After Abdur Rahman replied that this was so, Muhammad said to the woman, you claim that he is impotent, but by Allah, these boys resemble him as a crow resembles a crow. So in other words, this lady just basically wanted to get back. He was beating her. She didn't want to be with him anymore. She wanted to go back to her previous husband who maybe didn't beat her. And then obviously Muhammad calls her out saying that he's impotent, but he's already has 2 children. I guess they didn't know about erectile dysfunction back then. Maybe he could have developed it after he had the boys, but all right, that's neither here nor there. Several things should be noticed. Aisha, the favorite wife of Muhammad, calls attention to the common mistreatment of Muslim wives by their husbands. In other words, she called them out. She said, no one suffers more than Muslim women. And it still goes on today. You saw the video. Muhammad does not condemn the beating, nor even mention it. So in other words, he doesn't even talk about the bruise. He only just focuses on the situation, the impotence and all of that. Because once again, it's all about the sex. Mm-hmm. The wife may want a divorce, but before she can get it, she must have sex with the husband she wants to leave. In the next hadith, Muhammad does not condemn the fact that Abu Jam beats his wives. Check this out. She said, what is that name of that lady?
Muawiyah
and Abdul Jam were among those who had given me the proposal of marriage. Thereupon Allah's apostle said, what is it again?
Muawiyah
is destitute and in poor condition, and Abdul Jam beats women. You should take Osama B. Oh, I thought it was Osama bin Laden. Osama B. Zaid as your husband. So in other words, he basically just says Muawiyah. Instead of we don't need to talk about the beating, just get another husband. Like, in other words, just sweeping it under the rug once again. Excuse me, cough button. Not only did Abdul Jam beat women, this hadith shows that using a stick to beat your wife is not disapproved by Muhammad. She said, when my period of iddah was over, that's the waiting period to make sure you're not pregnant, I mentioned to him that Muawiyah and Jam had sent proposals of marriage to me, whereupon Allah's messenger said, as for Abu Jam, he does not put down his staff from his shoulder, and as for Muawiyah, he is a poor man having no property. Marry Osama. I objected to him, but he again said, marry Osama. So I married him. Allah blessed me, and I was envied by others. But in other words, when it talks about put down his staff, that means that he constantly beats with sticks. In the next hadith, we have a part of the code for beating. So there's an actual code for beating. A woman may be beaten, but not on the face. This contradicts the earlier hadith where Muhammad did not condemn the husband bruising his wife's face. So in other words, before, they didn't even talk about the poor lady's green bruise, but now let's see what he says. Narrated Muawiyah al-Kushari. Muawiyah asked, Apostle of Allah, what is the right of the wife of one of us over him? So in other words, what is the right of the wife over the man? He replied, that you should give her food when you eat, clothe her when you clothe yourself, do not strike her on the face, do not revile her or separate yourself from her except in the house. So in other words, the only point was don't hit her in the face. Doesn't mean you can't hit her, just not the face. In other words, we don't want the neighborhood talking about it. Because if a wife walks around with the bruise, they're going to be talking about it. Then they got gossip. But if you beat her on the back, she's always covered, right?
Yeah.
Unless she's that girl that came out naked over there in Iran. At first, Muhammad said that Muslims should not beat their wives. This was at first. Muawiyah said, Apostle of Allah, how should we approach our wives and how should we leave them? He replied, approach your tilth. Remember, tilth is a plowed field, a term for vagina. So in other words, approach your vagina when or how you will. Give her food when you take food. Clothe when you clothe yourself. Do not revile her face and do not beat her. So, whoa. So first we went from not beating to then after you could start beating them. All right. But the men complained, of course, because that's what men do, right? The men complained about wives who were not submissive enough and had to be put in their place. When the Muslim woman came to his house to complain about the beating, he condemned them, not the husbands who beat them. Physical force is always an option in Islam. This is the hadith. Muhammad said, do not beat Allah's handmaidens. But when Umar came to Muhammad and said, women have become emboldened towards their husbands, Muhammad gave permission to beat them. Then many women came around the family of Muhammad complaining about their husbands. So Muhammad said, many women have gone around Muhammad's family complaining against their husbands. They are not the best among you. In other words, these women, all they are is complainers. So in other words, in Islam, Muhammad allows for you to beat your wife. And then when the wife complains, Muhammad says you're like a crappy Muslim. You're not a good woman. It's a horrible situation. Here we have an example of Muhammad striking his favorite wife. Ooh, gossipy. Let's see what this is all about. This is a hadith. When it was my turn for Allah's messenger to spend the night with me, he turned his side, put on his mantle, and took off his shoes and placed them near his feet. Okay, so he's putting his his mantle, his shoes, taking off his shoes, and he spread the corner of his shawl on his bed and then lay down till he thought I had gone to sleep. So he goes, lays down, waits for Aisha to maybe go to sleep. He took hold of his mantle slowly and put on the shoes slowly and opened the door and went out and then closed it lightly. So in other words, once he thought Aisha was sleeping, he quietly got out of bed and then he quietly put on his shoes and then he quietly opened the door and then he quietly shut the door. Now, what does she do? I covered my head, put on the veil, and tightened my waist wrapper, and then went out following his steps until he reached Baki. So now this Aisha, you got to give her some credit for her chutzpah, you know? Yeah. Like most other women will be like, oh no, he's just going out to do something. But then she's like, the way he left was real sneaky. So let me go see what's doing. He stood there, and he stood for a long time. He then lifted his hands 3 times and then returned, and I also returned. He hastened his steps, and I also hastened my steps. So in other words, he started walking faster. I started walking faster. He ran, and I too ran. So now it's a whole thing like, oh, he's starting to run. I got to run. He came to the house, and I also came to the house. I, however, preceded him. In other words, she got there before him, and I entered the house. And as I lay down in the bed, the holy prophet entered the house and said, "Why is it, O Aisha, that you are out of breath?" I said, "There's nothing." He said, "Tell me, or Allah would inform me." I said, "Messenger of Allah, may my father and mother be ransomed to you." And then I told him the whole story. He said, "Was it the darkness of your shadow that I saw in front of me?" I said, "Yes." He struck me on the chest, which caused me pain, and then said, "Did you think that Allah and his apostle would deal unjustly with you?" So once he figures out that it was her that had went out there to go follow him, and then they ran back, she admits she's a good woman. She didn't try to lie. She could have been like, "Nah, no, it wasn't me." No, she said it was me. And then what did he do? He struck her on the chest, and then he goes and basically pronounces some sort of judgment on her. "Did you think that Allah and his apostle would not deal unjustly with you?" No. This next hadith determines Islamic social custom and family law about wife beating. Muhammad said, this is the hadith, "A man will not be asked as to why he beat his wife." Ooh, sweep it under the rug. So in other words, as a Muslim, you are not to ask another Muslim as to why you beat the wife. So in other words, if you're ever interrogated by a police officer, you don't have to tell them, according to Sharia law.
Yeah.
This hadith equates camels, slaves, and women. Yes, I just said that, and I'll repeat it. This hadith equates, in other words, it puts them on equal footing, camels, slaves, and women. Muhammad said, hadith, "If one of you marries a woman or buys a slave, he should say," in other words, if one of you marries a woman or buys a slave, okay, he should say, "Oh Allah, 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 oh Allah, I ask you for the good in her and in the disposition you have given her. I take refuge in you from the evil in her and in the disposition you have given her." So in other words, when you marry a woman or you guys get a slave, assuming the slave is a woman, because it's talking about women in context here, it's female. So you either marry a woman or you go and buy a female sex slave, whatever it may be. You should pray to Allah and say, "Allah, please make her good. You know, make her disposition be positive, be good. I take refuge in you from the evil in her." So already there's an assumption that there's evil in her, of course, because Muhammad said that all women go to hell. Then how does he end this hadith? This dude Muhammad's the trip. "When he buys a camel, he should take hold of the top of its hump and say the same thing." So in other words, when you buy a woman, when you marry a woman, you buy a slave or you go buy a camel, you got to put your hand on the hump or pray this to Allah, Allah, I ask you for the good in her. So also the good in the camel, please. Thank you. Because, you know, some camels are like bad.
Yeah, I guess.
Like they're very recalcitrant. I mean, when we've gone, we've had obviously those camels. They're just beat down to submission.
Yeah.
You know, but I know that there's camels that are like just don't want to do anything. More about slaves and women. There's another hadith. The Prophet said, "None of you should flog his wife as he flogs a slave, and then have sexual intercourse with her in the last part of the day." So in other words, don't beat your wife the way you beat your slave and then have sex with her after. I mean, at the very least, at least he's conscious of the fact that if you beat your wife, she's not going to be happy with you. Yeah. And ultimately, she's not going to want to have sex with you. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about Sharia law in regards to this. The Hadith, the Sirah, and the Quran are all the basis of Islamic law, the Sharia law. Here we see how Islamic law follows from the previous material in dealing with a rebellious wife. If she commits rebelliousness, I don't know, that doesn't sound right?
It's weird.
If she commits rebellion, let's leave it there.
Yeah.
He keeps from sleeping, in other words, having sex with her, and may hit her, but not in a way that injures her. So in other words, like you could hit her, but not like to injure her. Meaning he may not bruise her, break bones, wound her, or cause blood to flow. So in other words, you may beat the rebellious wife, but not to an extent that she's either bruised, she breaks a bone, she's severely wounded, or she actually gets cut and blood flows. It is unlawful to strike another's face. He may hit her whether she is rebellious only once or whether more than once. See, now, this is where you get the interpretation. If Muhammad would have said, beat her only once, in other words, hit her once, and that's it. But he left it open to interpretation with saying, or whether more than once. So the minute he says whether more than once, that means you could beat her down for a day.
Yeah.
And just as long as you don't like bruise her or whatever. Though a weaker opinion holds that he may not hit her unless there is repeated rebelliousness or rebellion. To clarify this, let's talk about these rulings. Number one, both man and wife are obliged to treat each other kindly and graciously. So in other words, it is also on the man, not just the woman, to treat each other rightly, you know? Okay, that's nice. It is not lawful for a wife to leave the house except by the permission of the husband. We've already talked about that. It is obligatory for a wife to obey her husband as is customary in allowing him full, lawful sexual enjoyment of her person. In other words, it is obligatory for every wife that is right now in Iran that whenever he taps on the door or whenever he rings the bell, she opens her legs. No ifs, ands, or buts. If she does not open the legs, then guess what? She's in rebellion. So then she is subject to be disciplined. It is obligatory for the husband to enable her to remain chaste and free of want for sex if he is able. If the wife does not fulfill one of the above mentioned obligations, she is termed rebellious. And the husband takes the following steps to correct. So now this is the outline in the Sharia law. This is how you deal with a quote unquote rebellious woman. Number one, admonition and advice by explaining the unlawfulness of rebellion. So in other words, you sit down and you say wife, you say Fatima, or you say Safiya, whatever you want to call her. Okay, you're not doing what Allah wants you to do. Muhammad Puba, he left us these clear things. Let's have a discussion about this. Look, I don't want you to fall in rebellion. I don't want you in the last day to be not given rewards. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're definitely going to hell anyway. But independent of that, you're my wife, and I think that we need to have a talk about this. Okay, that's number one. Number two, if that talk, and if you saying, hey, look, you're supposed to follow the Quran, you're supposed to follow the Hadith. If admonition is ineffectual, he keeps from her by not sleeping in bed with her. Oh, Allah, praise Allah, the wife is saying in the other room. Obviously, if she's in rebellion, the last thing she's going to want is you on top of her.
Yeah.
I mean, are these guys that blind? Or is it just women back in that day? They were just so submissive and so like, I try to think about it. Like, for instance, when I read the Bible, I have to transport myself to, like, if you read the New Testament, to 2,000 years ago. Yeah. I have to think about what life would have been like for Jesus walking around, what life would have been like for John when he was in the Isle of Patmos, or what it was like for Paul when he was going through all of Macedonia, modern day Turkey, Greece, all of that, Rome, and what life was like. But I also have to do this for here. I have to try to think, what is life like in the 600s that you come up with these laws that are so dumb that in modern day, you would actually probably have the woman kicking the man out of the house, not the other way around. But all right. So if admonition is ineffectual, guess what? You don't sleep with her. And then thirdly, If keeping from her, in other words, if not having sex with her still doesn't work, she's still in rebellion, it is permissible for him to hit her if he believes that hitting her will bring her back to the right path. So in other words, you try to talk it out, you admonish her. If she's still in rebellion, then you don't sleep with her. And then if she's still in rebellion, then you beat her. And that's how you get these supposedly submissive women, right? But apparently, according to Muhammad, these women spend their whole lives complaining and all of them are in hell. Examples of rebelliousness are when a wife gives a cold answer or does not submit to sex when he asks. So in other words, it's not only submitting to sex, it's also if you give the husband a cold shoulder. Yeah. Like you've been working all day, you got kids running around, you're milking the cow, you're cooking, you got all that. The man comes home, you're tired, and he's like, wife, what you been doing today? He asks me the same question every day. I want to slap this guy with a ladle. If you do that, or if he says, wife, come to bed, and you say, come on, I'm tired, I don't want to do it, then you're rebellious. He should not hit her, but tell her, fear Allah concerning the rights you owe to me. If she commits rebellion, he may hit her, but not in a way that injures her, meaning he may not bruise her, break bones, wound her, or cause blood to flow. It is unlawful to strike another's face. He may hit her whether she is rebellious only once or whether more than once. So it's crazy what we see going on there. Yeah. What time are we at?
Hour.
Yeah, I'm debating whether we wrap up the last 3 chapters next time or what do you think?
I don't think we'd be able to get through all 3 right now.
No, we're definitely not going to do all 3 today.
And the next ones are short too, so maybe it would be. Actually, there's a lot of reading.
Well, this next one is pretty short.
Yeah, I think we could do the next one.
Okay, let's do the next one. Yeah, because then after that, those are longer.
So this is where the book kind of takes a shift in the Quran and the Hadiths, and it goes more into Muhammad's life in particular, specifically. And this next one is speaking on the wives of Muhammad and kind of explaining the characteristics of all of his wives. And as we've talked about, in Islam, Muslims are allowed to have up to 4 wives, but here
Muhammad had 11 to 13.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe you can explain to us all of his wives.
All right, so this chapter is about the wives, so we'll just get through it. These are the bullet points. Number 1, Khadija was his favorite wife. I'm learning by listening to these Arabs talk on these debates. I'm learning the whole Khadija. Okay, Khadija was his favorite wife. Aisha, remember, Khadija was the businesswoman. She was the prosperous one. She owned land. She owned businesses. She was 45 years old. This punk Muhammad. She goes to Muhammad and says, hey, do you want to marry me? Not the other way around. The guy didn't even have the chutzpah to go and request marriage. She's the one like, hey, marry me. This woman, the minute Muhammad receives all of this revelation from Jibril, suddenly out of nowhere, she's no longer a businesswoman. She no longer owns anything. She's now stuck in the house and she's not allowed to do anything. No more business. So that was his favorite wife. Aisha was the favorite wife in his harem. So in other words, once you get past that first wife, once he started with this plurality of wives, which happened later on, by the way, he married Khadija when he was 20 years old. He did not start receiving quote unquote revelation from Allah via Jibril up until he was 40 years old. So for 20 years, Muhammad was a businessman living with his wife. It wasn't until he was 40 and she was already 60, or no, I think she died when he was 40 because she died when she was 65. Yeah. So in other words, after she's dead, that's when Muhammad starts with receiving revelation and the plurality of wives comes into play. So we have to have an understanding that for 20 years, they were married. They lived together. Everything was copacetic. When she dies, he starts to receive revelation. Suddenly out of nowhere, the 6-year-olds are up for grabs. So that's a problem. Okay. Muhammad started having sex with Aisha when she was 9 years old. These are the bullet points we'll expound. One of Muhammad's favorite sexual partners was a Christian slave girl, a Coptic Christian slave girl. We're going to talk about her. And 2 of Muhammad's wives were captive booty in jihad. In other words, they were the how do you say booty? like the treasures, the plunder, the treasures. I never like saying booty because I feel like I'm watching Pirates of the Caribbean. Yeah. Now, real quick before I get into this, because this is a short chapter, we're gonna get through it. I'm just going to repeat them real quick, then I'm going to get to my point. Khadijah was his favorite wife. Aisha was the favorite wife, 9-year-old girl when he mounted her in his harem. Muhammad started having sex with Aisha when she was 9 years old. One of Muhammad's favorite sexual partners was a Christian slave girl. Lastly, 2 of Muhammad's wives were captive booty in jihad, or captive, what was it? Plunder. Okay. Now, I just gave you 5 bullet points. This is a holy man. This is a prophet from God. This is a man supposedly sent by God, Allah, which, by the way, just so you know, Allah, the definition of Allah is God. So in other words, in Arabic, when you say God, you say Allah. Just so you know. I don't know if people knew that. It isn't a name. It is literally God. Translated in Arabic is Allah. All right. So supposedly God, Allah, sends the final revelation to Muhammad Puba through Jibril. I just read you 5 bullet points. What about those 5 bullet points say that this man is a holy man?
None of them.
The fact that he had Aisha when she was 9 years old, he had sex with her. The fact that his favorite sexual partner was a Christian slave girl. And the fact that 2 of his wives were plunder in jihad. What is jihad? When they go in there and they kill or they require you to become a Muslim. If you don't submit to Allah and become a Muslim, at that point, the men, they chop your head off. The women, they rape, and the kids, they take as slaves. Now compare that with Jesus Christ. Compare everything I just said with Christ Jesus. Read the New Testament, Muslims. Muslims, I encourage you, read the New Testament. Actually, get a Bible online. You can get a Bible. Open up. Start with the book of Matthew. Read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Don't listen to what your imams are saying. Don't listen to what your mom and dad are saying. Read the Bible. Read the actual Bible. Read what Isa, Jesus, was actually like in the Holy Scripture. Don't take Muhammad's crap version of a Bible, the Quran, or the Hadith that tell you about Isa, about Jesus. Don't take his word for it. Why don't you go to the source? Why don't you go to the source and actually compare your prophet, the atrocities that this animal did, compare it with the life of Christ Jesus? Maybe then the Holy Spirit will convict you to go to the truth. Let's keep going. The best estimate of the number of Muhammad's wives is 11, and he had 2 sex slaves. Some people say 14, up to 17. Khadijah married Muhammad when she was 40 and he was 25. She was a wealthy widow. Oh, so wait, she was 40 and he was 20. See, I get that mixed up, 45 and 20. Okay, all right. She was a wealthy widow and was his only wife for 25 years. She died at the age of 65 when Muhammad was 50. They had 6 children, but only their daughter Fatima survived Muhammad. Another wife that he had, Sauda. Muhammad married Sauda. She was a Muslim widow 2 months after Khadijah's death. About 7 years later, she gave up her turn with Muhammad to Aisha, his favorite wife. So in other words, after Khadijah dies, because Khadijah, remember, she was a strong-willed woman. She owned businesses. She's all that. Once she's out of the picture, that's when all the filth arrives. That's when let's have a good time. Let's just start getting married. Oh, Allah. I received revelation from Allah that now you can have 4 wives, even though he had 11. Oh, Allah, it's permissible. It is halal. That is why they say halal. Halal means permissible. Just so you know that, if you guys eat halal food or whatever, we got a market down here that opened up in Homestead that has a whole huge halal section. It means permissible. All right. And then what is the opposite of halal?
Haram.
Haram, my boy. Very good. So Sauda, she's been married. After 7 years of being married to him, she gives up her turn. In other words, back then they had turns. I can only imagine who kept up the schedule. Like, did they have like some sort of chart, like a monthly calendar? Like, just like, who knows? Or is it just like, okay, tonight you were with Aisha. Okay, tomorrow you're with this one. Okay, the next day you're with that one. The stamina that this man had. I mean, I'm just saying. Okay, all right. So she gave up her position to Aisha. So in other words, she stopped having sex with Muhammad, basically. Aisha was the daughter of Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr was the one that was his companion, and he actually would become the leader after Muhammad dies. She was the daughter of Abu Bakr. She was engaged to Muhammad when she was 6 years old. Muhammad started having sex with her when she was 9, and he was a whopping old age of what, Junior?
53.
53-year-old nasty, filthy pedophile mounting this lovely young girl, the daughter of his compatriot, of his right-hand man, basically. The fact that this guy would give up his 6-year-old, 9-year-old daughter to this 53-year-old man, you got to question that guy as well. She was Muhammad's favorite wife, of course. The guy's a pedophile. He likes them young, and was 18 when he died. She was 2 years old at the time of this dream. So in other words, when she was 2 years old, Muhammad had this dream. This is the hadith. Muhammad dreamed, get this, she's 2 years old. Muhammad dreamed of Aisha twice before they met. In his dream, an angel carried a pitcher on a piece of silk, and the angel said to him, "This is your wife." When he uncovered the pitcher and saw that it was Aisha's, he said, "This is from Allah, it will be done." I can almost be certainly assured that most pedophiles will probably say the same thing. Oh, I had a dream of that young girl, and then it was the will of God for me to be okay. Yeah. What happened on Aisha's wedding night? This is a hadith. Muhammad became engaged to Aisha when she was 6 years old. She then went to Medina and stayed at the home of Bani al-Harith, where she got ill and lost her hair. So in other words, she got some sort of influenza, something, some illness. After her hair grew back by the age of 9, her mother handed her to the care of some women who prepared her for marriage to Muhammad. Because of course she has to be taught. She's a 9-year-old girl. She has dolls. She doesn't know what to do. Like in other words, when this 53-year-old man walks into the tent, this is what you got to be prepared for. He consummated his marriage with her when she was 9 years old, and she remained with him for 9 more years until his death.
I may be reading into this, but she got sick when she was 6 and then came back when she was 9. Would he have consummated the marriage if she was 6? If she didn't get sick?
That's a good question. Yeah, like in other words, the only reason he consummated when she was 9 was because she got better. Yeah. Like she was 6, she lost her hair, and then it took time for her to grow her hair back. But okay, good question. What if she didn't get sick? Yeah. Or what if she got sick but she healed earlier? What if she healed when she was 7 years old? Would he have then taken it? Exactly. Nobody knows. Only the God and the devil know what this idiot was doing. Our God, Yahweh, not Allah. Aisha brought her dolls into the harem. Since Muhammad hated images, he liked the image in his dream of Aisha. That was a good image. So the picture of Aisha in his dream, that was a good one. But he didn't like actual images. He hated images. This was a big favor to her. In other words, he didn't like things with faces on it, so dolls would have had a face. This is the hadith. Aisha used to play with dolls in front of Muhammad. Even though such acts were forbidden, this was allowed to do so before she reached the age of puberty. Her friends who played with her would hide when Muhammad entered the room, but he would call them back to resume playing with Aisha. So in other words, he allowed the dolls, and then Aisha had her little girlfriends there that were playing with her. And then once Muhammad would walk in, they would all leave, but then he would, no, stay, play with her. She's still a child. Okay, what is this next wife's name?
Juwayriya.
She was a captive when Muhammad attacked her tribe. So in other words, Muhammad attacks a tribe, she's a captive. The attack was a sneak attack, a favor to Muhammad. She was beautiful, and Muhammad paid her ransom to the jihadists who owned her. He then married her. As a result, the rest of the captives of her tribe were now related to Muhammad by marriage. They were then freed as a result. All right, this was I guess a positive, negative in the sense that they were captives, but positive in that it produced a good result for her relatives. All right. Hafsa is the one that likes to complain. Hafsa was a widow of the daughter of Umar, later to be the second caliph. So after Muhammad dies, Abu Bakr takes over. He runs it for a little while, and then you have Umar takes over. He's the second leader after Muhammad. So she was a widow of the daughter of Umar. So her husband must have died, and then her father was Umar, who was the second leader, the second caliph. Zainab, the daughter of who, Junior?
Khuzaimah.
This Zainab was the widow of Muhammad's cousin, killed at the Battle of Badr. She was called the mother of the poor for her charity work. She died before Muhammad died. Salama was the widow of a jihadist killed at the Battle of Uhud. Zainab bint Jash. Zainab was the beautiful wife of Muhammad's adopted son, Zaid. Oh, this is the one. This is the one. So if you remember the story, Muhammad had an adopted son. His name was Zaid, who also was the guy that wrote down the Quran as Muhammad was reciting it. Muhammad starts to take an interest in this Zainab. He's looking at her. Because, of course, remember, if a man is inside of a room with a woman, the first thing he wants to do is have sex. So he checks her out, and he's like, oh, man, I really like this chick, but dang, she's married to my adopted son. So then he tells Zaid, hey, would you consider divorcing her? Because I think I want to get down on that. And then, of course, Zaid, being a nice guy, divorces her, and then Muhammad goes and takes her. So in other words, it's once again, just it's prostitution without saying prostitution. Yeah. The Quran changed the Arabian incest laws so that Muhammad could marry her. She bragged to the other wives that Muhammad had chosen them, but she was chosen by Allah for Muhammad. So, okay. You then have Safiya. Safiya was the beautiful Jew of Khaybar. Her husband and father were killed by Muhammad's jihad. After the battle, Muhammad married her, and we went through this already previously. This was the beautiful Jewess that they had killed her husband and her father, and then she was taken by some other dude. But Muhammad saw her, and he's like, "Oh, this Jewish chick is hot." So then he traded 2 girls for Safiya. So we went through that previously. You also have Habiba. Habiba was the daughter of Abu Sufyan, an enemy of Muhammad. She was a widow when Muhammad remarried her. You have Maimuna. Maimuna was a widow of 51 when Muhammad married her. She must have been hot. She was 51. I mean, I don't know. Now you have Mary the Coptic slave. Mary was a Christian slave used for sex by Muhammad. Puba. Mary was fair-skinned with wavy hair. So she wasn't dark. She was very light-skinned. She was the cause of a revolt of Muhammad's wives when he spent too much time with her, which we talked about that last time. She had a son by him who died at an early age. So in other words, this girl, she was a Christian girl, Mary the Coptic slave. She was apparently probably really good at having sex because Muhammad really liked her. And then the fact that Muhammad was spending so much time with her caused the other wives to get angry. And then that's when, remember, supposedly Allah sent down this verse saying that if you guys don't stop complaining, then I will divorce you. I'll throw you out as my wives. Okay, yeah. And last but not least, another beautiful Jewish slave. Her name is none other than Rihanna, not the singer. This is another girl, 1,400 years before the current Rihanna. This was the original Rihanna. Rihanna was a beautiful Jewish slave used for sex by Muhammad. Didn't he have enough with the 11? I mean, now you need a couple of extra ones in here. She became his after he executed her husband along with 800 other Jewish males. So he took on Rihanna after he executed her husband and all the 800. And how did he execute them by? Beheading. So the next time you hear a Rihanna song, remember that beautiful Jewish slave that Muhammad killed, beheaded her husband and all of the other 800 men. Next time you hear Rihanna. All right? That's what we have. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts. I gave you a lot of thoughts.
A lot of thoughts. I mean, obviously, it's crazy that you would look at Muhammad and his actions and you create an entire religion around it. And then the way he treats women as well. And then it's funny that is one of the things I was thinking is that he didn't want people to beat their wives, and then people started complaining. So then he said, "Oh, you could beat your wives. It's okay."
Exactly.
So it's not from God that you can't beat your wives.
It's progressive revelation.
Yeah.
It is him just saying stuff. And then the more you read into it, the thing is that, and this is a good lesson for you guys. If you only read the Quran, if you what they call a Quran only Muslim, 99% of it you will not understand. Because they don't give you context. Like, for instance, they'll just say, "Oh, Allah," and spoke to that person, but they don't tell you the name of the person, so you have no idea who they're talking about. The name Muhammad is only mentioned 4 times in the entire Quran. 4 times in the entire Quran, only Muhammad comes out. Jesus comes out more times than Muhammad in the Quran, just so you know. Fun fact. Okay. But in order for you to understand the Quran, you need the Hadith. And you need the Sirah, which they comprise the Sunnah. The Sunnah explains the Quran. The problem is that everything in the Sunnah are just things that Muhammad said. It is not gospel, in other words, but the Muslim, for them, it is gospel. So in other words, you have a book supposedly handed down by God, but then you have the prophet of God having casual conversations with people, and then the Muslims will say, well, if it's in the Hadith, it is gospel as well. So in other words, Muhammad, because a bunch of dudes were complaining that their wives are rebellious, he just says, all right, beat them a bit. First of all, wait. First, admonish them. Then after that, don't sleep with them, as if that's going to be some favor, right? And then thirdly, if they're still annoying, beat them up, beat them. Allah never said that in the Quran. That is in the Hadith. So that is a good lesson for you guys to understand that it is all made up. Allah supposedly sent down this revelation, but it wasn't clear, even though every Muslim will say that the Quran is perfectly clear. But you don't know what the Quran means unless you have these other books that, once again, are just Muhammad talking. It is not revelation from God. It is just him talking, and then the Muslims interpret what he's saying as that it came from Allah, but it actually did not. It is just him talking. So that's just a quick little lesson, so you guys can have that. And then next time we'll wrap up on Islam. That's it. Next podcast will be my last podcast on Islam. I'm done with Islam. I've done too much. I've done too much with them. I've already given you enough. Let's go somebody else. Let's go somewhere else. Where are we going to go next?
Hinduism, right?
We're going to do Hinduism. Then we're going to do what?
Buddhism.
Then we'll do other stuff. We'll do other stuff. We're going to give you guys stuff.
I think like a few months ago, you said you want to do church history.
I said I want to do church history before the first podcast that we did. And now we've done 20 something of them. And I still haven't done any church history. But let's finish up these religions and then we'll get to the good stuff.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us. And we'll see you next week with more Islam and more on how they treat their women, which is very terrible.
Peace and love. Peace and love. Take care. Have a good week, all of y'all. Don't forget to hit that like button and the subscribe thing. All the buttons. Hit the buttons. Hit all the buttons. Producer, you got anything you want to say?
She said no.
Producer's good. She's like, I want to get these headphones off of me already.
All right. God bless.
God bless you all.